Let's rock.
Let's go crazy!
Hello and welcome to something new on the channel. If you don't know, I like to play Magic the Gathering a lot, specifically Draft. And I've always wanted to try this. So the next new set is coming out in 2 weeks, Outlaws of Thunder Junction. And I'm a Draft aficionado. So when you play Draft, you want to know what the best cards are. So as they get passed to you, you pick the right ones. So in this particular episode that I'm doing, I'm going to talk about Outlaws of Thunder Junction Draft. I'll spend a bit of time talking about the top commons. And I'll go through it quickly. Why commons? Because in a pack, around half of it is commons. And half of what you're going to be drafting is going to be commons. So if you pick the right commons, you have an advantage against the competition. So I want to start and talk about the mechanics of Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So there are 5 named mechanics in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. And what my observation is, around three of those 5 seem to be spell-based on cast mechanics. And 2 out of those remaining 5 are creature-based mechanics. So my sense is, spells feel like a bit more important in this format, and we'll sort of go through it as I talk through the cards. So the first mechanic that is in Outlaws of Thunder Junction is plot. So plot is basically just something that you will see on cards, which is sort of it's not always a cost reduction on the card, but what it happens is you are not casting the card, you're going to be setting aside or plotting the card, putting it in exile for a few turns. For you to cast for free on a later turn, so it goes into exile. And sometimes there are effects that happen wherein when you plot, you get a bonus, sometimes you don't, sometimes it's a cost bonus reduction, and sometimes you will also just get an effect when you do a plot. The second mechanic that we're going to talk about is spree. It's again usually often tacked onto instants and sorceries, and you will see that spree cards will have a base cost up top, and then at the bottom a myriad of abilities or effects that you can pay in order to get those effects. So it's like a dining buffet of effects. You can also always have to pay the top cost, and then up to you what additional cost you want to pay to get the additional effects. Pretty straightforward. And then there's this effect which we're all familiar with already, but in this particular set, OTJ, Outlaws of Thunder Junction, they are calling effects wherein you are targeting your opponent's stuff. So that's whether you're targeting their creature, you're targeting their deck, you're targeting their graveyard. They're bunching all of those effects as committing a crime. So there's nothing mechanically new with what's happening with committing a crime, but it's a new effect, or it's a new way you get benefits for targeting your opponent's stuff, right? And that will come up more often than not. So those 3 mechanics, I feel like plot, spree, and committing a crime, feel like effects that get tacked onto spells. And you will see, or as you're casting a spell. So you will see that come up in some of the mechanics as we talk through the commons. And then there are these 2 other what I like to call creature-based mechanics. One is Outlaw, which is basically another batching mechanic. There's nothing new being introduced here other than they're now calling creatures with the typing of assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, and warlocks. They're batching all of those together as outlaws. And you will see in this expansion or in this format that there will often be cards or effects that trigger off outlaws entering the battlefield if you have an outlaw existing on the battlefield. So what I will say is those 5 creature types are going to be slightly more important in this format compared to another generic creature type. And then the other mechanic is saddle. So what I like to call vehicles for creatures. Basically, if you're familiar with vehicles, they have this crew cost wherein you have to tap a certain power of creatures, so whether it's multiple creatures or one creature who can meet the crew cost, and then that artifact becomes an artifact creature, springs to life, and does battle for you. Here, they sort of flip that on its head because it's a Western cowboy theme. You will see creatures with the keyword mount and the ability saddle. So all mounts, any creatures with the creature typing Mount, which also is a relevant creature typing in this format. By the way, we'll talk about that later on. We'll have the ability Saddle and then a number. So the number is basically the crew cost for the creature. And when you crew or saddle this creature, it gains an ability that it either benefits itself, benefits the creature who saddled it, things like that. So I think Outlaw and Mount are the two creature-based strategies or effects in this expansion. But let's see, we will see as we talk through the cards what feels like more relevant and more important as we discuss the cards. Okay, we will start with the white common. So, if you don't know, there are 15 commons in each color. And then in each pack, there are going to be at least 6 commons. So, if you have a pack of, I think, 14 cards, half of that, or a little bit under or between an average of that, will be common. So, you want to know what the commons are. I think that I'm going to talk about the top 4 commons in each color. It's just a nice round number to talk about. Of course, not all of the colors top 4s will be the same, but these are generally, if you're playing a certain color, you want to be looking for these cards because among the 15, this is probably the best commons in that color. So I'm gonna start with Take Up the Shield. Take Up the Shield is a 2-mana instant, which is basically a protection effect. There's nothing really else to say about Take Up the Shield other than it's a very powerful card. It puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains lifelink and also indestructible for instant speed. So what you usually want from your combat tricks is 1, for you to win the combat. So if you're gonna put a +1/+1 counter permanently and to make your creature indestructible, you are likely to win the combat. 2, your creature is likely to survive and have a +1/+1 counter moving forward during the game. And then 3, the secret mode of Take Up the Shield and what makes it so powerful is it gives lifelink. So can you imagine giving your huge creature, your 5/5, your 6/6, suddenly you take up the shield it, and then you were down previously at 3 life, now you're back up to 8, 10 life, and the race completely flips in your favor. Take Up the Shield, just a very good card. If you haven't played with it in Dominaria United, you will know. If you played with it, you will know it's a good card. My second pick for best card in white is Holy Cow. It's not only is the name funny, but it's a very powerful card. Thank God. You're gonna be a new play this format. You're gonna have a lot of games where your opponent goes Holy Cow and casts the Holy Cow in front of you because 1, it's a 3-mana 2/2 flying creature with flash. So it's gonna come out of nowhere. Your opponent's gonna go Holy Cow, and when it enters, it's gonna have it's gonna give you 2 life and scry 1. So I think by default the ability is just so much for 3 mana. I don't think the creature typing of it, which is Ox Angel, will matter much. If you remember, Outlaws is what's important in this format, but you will see that because you will see a lot of creatures with flash in this format, and it will allow you to hold up mana a lot of the time. So I think cards like with flash lets you play with plot a bit better, right? Because if you remember how plot works, plot is basically you cast a creature now, set it aside, and then later on you can play it for free. So in a future turn, you can cast your plot card for 0 mana, finally, after you set it aside, and then suddenly prepare with Holy Cow. So nice things with Holy Cow, like cards like this, is even if you're falling a bit behind because you keep on playing the tempo game, because you're holding back value for later on, it gains you a bit of life, so you're able to catch up eventually in the game. My third pick for best white common is Wanted Griffin. It's a 4-mana 3/2 flying griffin, and when it dies, it creates a 1/1 red mercenary creature, which is the 1/1 red mercenary is sort of the free token thing that comes in this format. So in Crimson Vow, it was blood. In other formats, it was treasure that was free. Here, the free thing that you usually get is a 1/1 mercenary creature. And usually, what we've seen in all draft formats is the things that give the free things is usually very good, comes out very good. So what we've seen with cards like this is Either they will come with this extra thing upon entering the battlefield, or sometimes a bit less valuable but still very good. They get it upon, they die, they get destroyed. So this is a lesser version of that kind of powerful card, Wanted Griffin, but I think it's still going to be pretty good just because it gives away free things. And then the fourth card that I think is going to be very good in white is Outlaw Medic. So this one is a bit interesting. It's a 2-mana 1/3 human rogue. So it's a rogue, therefore it triggers any outlaw effects there are. And at the same time, it's a 1/3 with lifelink that when it dies, it draws you a card. So this is less of an aggressive card, but it's more of a, I'm biding my time, and then later on, I'm gonna trigger off all of my power effects with cards with reduced costs through plot. I'm gonna do a big spree turn, and because you have a 1/3 with lifelink that when it dies, it replaces itself, so you're not really behind. I feel like this Outlaw Medic is gonna be one of those annoying cards when you're facing against it, just because your opponent you can't do against it. You can't do anything against it. You can't attack into it, and if you point a removal spell at it, it's gonna replace itself, so you still feel like you didn't gain any ground. Let's move on to blue. What are the best 4 commons in blue? I'm gonna start off with Lone Shark, which is a 4-mana shark rogue. Again, the creature type matters, it's a 3/4, and it has plot, which is if you plot it, it goes to the side, you get to cast it later on, but it also has the extra ability wherein if you cast 2 or more spells this turn, you draw a card. So we usually find these effects wherein cards, creatures, it comes with a body, it's a creature, and it also draws you a card to be very, very powerful. It's usually like top 10 in most formats because it replaces itself, it continues to give you gas, and games of limited are all about having gas till the very end and outvaluing your opponent. So the catch here is the card doesn't come free. It has to be basically the Lone Shark has to be the second or later on card you've cast this turn. Otherwise, if it's the first thing you cast, it won't trigger. So the play pattern, I feel like with Lone Shark, is either you will cast a cheap spell first and then cast the Lone Shark as a 4-mana spell later on, so you need 5 mana available in order to do it, or you're gonna plot the Lone Shark first and then later on you cast a big spell or whatever spell first, and then you cast the Lone Shark for free, then the spell casting ability triggers, and then you draw a card. A bit more hoops to jump through, but I feel like it's gonna be worth it. Lone Shark, probably the best blue common, I believe. Speaking of cheaper spells to cast, I have 2 of cheap blue spells coming up. I'm gonna talk about first, I guess, Take the Fall. Take the Fall is a 1-mana instant that if it gives a creature -1, -0, and if you have, it's not an and, but if you have outlaw, relevant creature types as I was talking about, it gets -4, -0. So a 1-mana that gives -4, -0, and at the same time replaces itself, draws a card. So you're able to, I think, these cheaper spells that do a lot of things and then also lets you do or cast other spells later on your turn are gonna be very good or important in this game because there's so many effects in the game, which we will show later on, that trigger off you casting 2 spells. One of them is the Lone Shark, and then all of these other plot effects. So plot effects lets you reduce costs, allows you to cast 2 spells in 1 turn. Also, you can just circumnavigate or go around that by just casting just a cheap spell, like a 1-mana Take the Fall, and then triggering off its abilities if you have relevant creature types, outlaws like the Shark Rogue. Another effect, another cheap spell is Failed Fording, which is a 2-mana instant that lets you bounce non-land permanent. So not just creatures, you can bounce artifacts, enchantments, any pacifism effects you can also bounce. So that's an interesting effect for this. And if you control a desert, you get to surveil one. So usually this 2-mana bounce unsummon, so it's not unsummon actually, it's a bounce effect for any non-land permanent, is powerful. It's unassuming because it's basically a removal spell at instant speed. It ruins combat for your opponent. So you just need to win a combat with this and it's already done its work. And it's usually better if it comes like a bonus. So Surveil 1, while it's like not really drawing a card, it's like half a card. It's good. And then as you will see, there's this another mechanic. It's not one of the named mechanics, deserts. So we'll talk about that, but quickly I'll just say there are 10 dual land deserts in packs that you can open up. So those are going to be relevant land types, and we'll talk about that later on. But I'll say right now, deserts are important. They're like outlaws. There are a lot of effects that trigger off deserts, the same way that a lot of effects trigger off deserts, outlaws, etc. Things like that. Okay, and then the fourth best common, I believe, is Phantom Interference, which is a spree card. It's the best. I think at common, this is the best spree card so far that I've seen. It's a 1 blue mana instant, wherein you can either pay +1 colorless to counter target spell. So it's basically a mana leak, a 2 mana counter spell that your opponent has to pay 2 mana in order to, still let their spell resolve. But it has a bonus that if you pay, notice, it's a +3 or a +1. So you either pay 4 mana, or if you don't have anything to counter, you can pay 4 mana instant speed to create a 2/2 white spirit creature with flying. And then you can also just pay all in all as you counter somebody's spell. You can pay 5 mana to counter their spell and also to create your 2/2 flying creature. That feels like a blowout when you get to do it. You just negate somebody's turn and then you make a 2/2 flyer that they have to deal with moving forward. I think Phantom Interference will be very powerful. I think the only thing that makes Phantom Interference interesting is because your opponents will also be, if you're against another opponent who's playing a lot of flash things, this is a bit worse if they're also plotting. So if they plot and spend their mana to plot, that's not casting a spell, and you cannot counter that. So those are situations where Phantom Interference might be a bit less powerful, but it has this back end effect, or like an effect that at the end of the day you can still cast it as a 4 mana instant speed 2/2 flyer. So it's not so bad. Before we end blue, actually, I just want to talk about Take the Fall and Field Fording. These are abilities, cheap abilities to commit a crime. So if you recall, committing a crime is an important mechanic in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So if you can sort of commit a crime and they'll still do something else, trigger commit a crime effects, these cheap cards really do come out and shine in this format. So let's move to black. I think the best black common is Vault Plunderer, which is a 3 mana human rogue with 3/1, and with ability, guess what? It lets you target the player and let them draw a card for the cost of 1 life. So it's kind of like Loan Shark with a bit less hoops to jump through. The body is a bit less impressive than Loan Shark. It's a 3/1, but it has a lot of like secret modes and upsides that we can talk about. One, it targets a player. So the way committing a crime is defined, you just need to target the player. It could be a beneficial effect or a bad effect, but if you target the player, that's committing a crime. So if you badly needed to trigger a crime effect, you can point your Vault Plunderer at them. Also, if they're down to 1, you can point the Vault Plunderer at them and just ping them that way and kill your opponent. And then the very last thing is it's a human rogue. So once again, it triggers outlaw abilities. It's a relevant outlaw on the battlefield if you need to trigger those effects. So just a lot of things happening with Vault Plunderer. I really like it, and I feel like it's the best black common. Second best black common, I think, is Desert's Dew, which is a 2 mana instant. By default, it gives something -2/-2. Here is the second instant where we are seeing, no pun intended, deserts matter. So I think as you draft and go through, so let's talk about this card first. It's 2 mana -2/-2. And if you drafted your deck well, you will also have a lot of maybe 1 or 2 deserts. If you're really good, you're gonna have a lot more deserts. So this can easily be 2 mana deal -3/-3, which is very powerful, or 2 mana deal -4/-4. I really like Desert's Dew. This is gonna be a very good removal spell, and at the same time, it's committing a crime. So again, you trigger the commit a crime effects. And also it's cheap. So I remember there's a bit of like double spelling theme in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Desert's Dew is 2 mana. Does so much. The third black common that I like is Skullduggery. So Skullduggery, I think, came out in original Ixalan. thus the piratey theme. It's a 1 mana instant that gives a target creature +1/+1, and another, if you want, another creature -1/-1. This card is so powerful if you haven't played against it. For 1 mana, you can essentially affect 2 combats. So if you just need a +1/+1 in one combat and then a -1/-1 in another combat, you technically, for 1 mana, you get to do all of those things. So it's very powerful if you haven't played against Skullduggery. It's almost impossible. It's basically a 1 mana +2/+2 if you're affecting the same combat, if you want to think of it that way, right? Because you get the +1, you get the -1 in the defending creature, but it has the flexibility to affect 2 combats and just blow out 2 combats against your opponent. At the same time, it's cheap again, so you get to double spell if you want to, and at the same time, it's committing a crime, so you can trigger commit a crime effects. 4th best common in black. I'm less enthused about this, but I feel like you just can't say no. It's Consuming Ashes. It's a 4 mana instant. Exile target creature outright. Instant speed. These effects tend to be very good no matter, usually it's costed at 3 like a murder, but at 4, I guess I'll take it. At the same time, if it's a smaller creature, you get to Surveil for 2. This one I'm not super confident only because of the cost, but I don't feel bad playing a 4 mana removal spell at instant speed in my deck. I just don't think it could potentially not be part of the top 4, but if you're telling me Consuming Ashes, instant speed, get rid of target creature is not part of your top 4, then you must be a very good caller. So black is interesting. We'll have to see how good black is in this format. Okay, let's go to red, which I feel like is always one of my favorite colors in any format. Red tends to be good. Our first red common that we will talk about is Prickly Pear. It's a 3 mana 2/2 plant mercenary. So it's a cactus that's also an outlaw, cactus outlaw. And then what its ability is, when Prickly Pear enters the battlefield, it, as I said with the white commons when we were talking about it, it gives a bonus piece of thing. It gives a 1/1 mercenary creature token for 3 mana, and we've seen this effect many times. It tends to be one of the top 10 commons in the set, only because it's just so much value. Getting 2 bodies on the battlefield lets you affect 2 combat steps. Sorry, 2 combats, not 2 combat steps, or potentially 2 combat steps, up to you. You can also use the 1/1 to chump and still have a creature left over. It does so many things. The creature that you get also, the 1 mana, 1/1, the 1/1 red mercenary also has attack on ability, which lets you tap it and then pump another creature +1/+0. So for 3 mana, just getting so much value, this will be one of the best commons in this format. The second best red common, I don't know if it's going to be second best, but one of the best red commons in this format probably is going to be Irascible Wolverine. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It's a 3 mana 3/2 Wolverine, so unfortunately not a relevant creature type, but when Irascible Wolverine enters the battlefield, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. So it's technically drawing you a card, right? If you can cast it. So if you haven't played with this effect before, it's a good effect because if you draw a land, then you can just play that land out if you want. And sometimes late in the game, if you draw a land, that's a land that you're glad you didn't have to draw, as you're like, at the end of the game, both of your opponents are top decking. You get to like basically surveil or scry off a land off the top of your battlefield. I guess the only hoops that you have to jump through with a card like Irascible Wolverine is if you pay 3 mana and then you top deck a relevant spell, there's a large chance that you don't have leftover mana to cast that spell that you drew, that relevant spell. So they sort of work around that by letting you plot. So you can technically plot the Wolverine first, put it aside in exile, and later on cast it for free for 0, and then draw the card. And if it's a relevant card, you're likely to have leftover mana to cast that spell if you played it correctly, if you sequenced correctly. So Irascible Wolverine, as I said, any creature that comes with a benefit like separately from itself, from its body, tends to be good. So it's either a 1/1 mercenary creature, it's either a bit of life like Holy Cow, or Irascible Wolverine. It draws you a card. Those cards tend to be good, like Loan Shark, things like that. Third red common that I will talk about is Explosive Derailment. It's a spree card. I don't think we've talked about... Oh, in blue, we talked about the blue spree card. This is the... I think blue-red is the spell, double spell color. So, Explosive Derailment is basically 1 mana, and it has 2/2. There's 2 modes for its spree. Either +2, deal 4 to target creature, or you can pay +2 to destroy target artifact. I think, just looking at the set, I haven't seen a lot of artifacts you want to destroy. But in case you do, you can pay 5 mana in order to destroy a target artifact and deal 4 to another creature. Instant speed. Or you can just pay 3 mana and deal 4 to target creature. Good removal spell. Take it, be happy with it, etc. Things like that. And then before we end with Explosive Derailment, I just want to say it's also committing a crime. So you get to trigger commit the crime effects in case you're doing that kind of thing. The fourth best common is Thunder Salvo. In red, it's a 2 mana instant that deals X damage to target creature, where X is 2. So if you have X can be 0, you'll still get 2 to deal to target creature, and the number of other spells you've cast this turn. So again, we go back to this thing I was talking about, where you either... How do you get more spells to cast in a turn? You either previously plotted a lot of other cards and start casting them for free, and then you cast Thunder Salvo. So easily, Thunder Salvo is something that you can make into a 3 damage spell, a 4 damage spell if you sequence your spells correctly. Also, another way you can make more spells in a turn is to cast cheaper spells first, like the 1 mana -4/-0 in blue, or which could be the 2 mana bounce in blue, and then Thunder Salvo. I mean, that's amazing value for 2 mana. And then again, as I said, it's committing a crime. Right. And finally, let's move on to green. Green tends to be a tricky color. It tends to be neither aggressive. It tends to be a bit more... It can sometimes be aggressive. It can sometimes be controlling. It can also be the house for multicolor decks, because it tends to have like ways to have access to different colors mana. So we'll start with what I think is usually a sure banger, a good card in green. Spinewood's Paladin is a 5 mana human knight, so it's not a relevant creature type, and I guess there are some relevant creature types in green. That is a 5/4 trample, and then when it enters, it gains you 3 life. So we've seen this effect a lot of times in Limited, that a big creature comes in, gains you anywhere from 3, 4, I don't know if there's a 5 mana one, but 3 life at least. So you take a bunch of damage early in the game, you cast the Spinewood's Paladin, you gain back that bit of life, you have a big 5/4 blocker or attacker moving forward, and that's how you turn the corner. This has an upside that it has plot, so you can technically cast this for 4 mana if you sequence your turns correctly. I think the second good common, or one of the best commons in green, will be Hard Bristle Bandit, which is a 2 mana 1/1 plant rogue. It's an outlaw, and it has the ability tap it for add 1 mana of any color. So we've seen this card many times in other formats. It tends to be like one of the top 4, top 5 green commons, only because it tends to enable not only ramp decks when you're trying to get to a really big creature really quickly, or it also enables multi-color decks, greedy decks that are trying to splash certain rares that they may have drafted, right? So we've seen this effect sometimes. It just gives you green mana specifically, but Hard Bristle Bandit specifically adds 1 mana of any color. I think that's very powerful, and that tends to be very powerful in Limited, especially if you're splashing. At the same time, it has a second ability. Whenever you commit a crime, untap Hard Bristle Bandit. So this technically gives you a 1 mana discount on each of your crimes, if you think about it, right? So you can have a Hard Bristle Bandit ready. You can use it to cast, for example, a removal spell. And then whenever you commit a crime, you're pointing at your opponent, it untaps. So all of your commit a crime effects are suddenly 1 mana discount. So you can have a Hard Bristle Bandit ready. You can use it to cast, for example, a removal spell. And then whenever you commit a crime, you're pointing at your opponent, it untaps. So all of your all of your commit a crime effects are suddenly 1 mana discount. less 1 mana. I feel like this is gonna be a very good card, honestly, because we just talked about a couple of really cheap crime effects, basically removal spells, bounce spells, things like that. Yeah, I think this is gonna be very good. I was thinking about this, I was looking at this, I thought, yeah, he feels like a good card, but I feel like this is something you can abuse. It's not, oh sorry, you can't abuse it. Sorry, scratch that. You can only trigger it once each turn, but still, it's a ramp, it's a fixer, and at the same time, you can at least give one of your crime effects a discount of 1. That's really good. I like it. I think one of the best commons in green also is Dance of the Tumbleweeds, which is another spree effect. It's base 2 mana cost, 1 in a green. And then for 1 mana, 1 colorless mana, you can search your library for a basic land card or a desert card, which could be relevant, and put it into the battlefield and shuffle. So that effect usually looks better than it reads, because sometimes some effects just lets you draw a card, put it into your hand, but this is basically real ramp, right? You can put, it's not part of your land drop, it puts a card into the battlefield, and its other spree effect is for 3 colorless mana. You can create an XX green elemental creature where X is the number of lands you control. So assuming that you cast this on 5, basically 2 base plus 3 colorless, you get a 5/5. If you cast this for, wait, no, this is bigger, I just realized now. So if you cast this on 6, you get the 7th land into play. You get a 7/7. So this is a lot better than it looks like. When I was reading green effects, I thought like, green seems okay. But I feel like green is following this theme of like being really good when they're really big. I think worth noting is if you use Hard Bristle Bandit to ramp out your Dance of the Tumbleweeds, of course, Hard Bristle Bandit doesn't count as a land, so you will get a bit smaller creature, but it might be worth it in certain situations. This is not a crime, by the way. I just wanted to say, Dance of the Tumbleweeds is not a crime. But this next card is a crime. Throw from the Saddle is a 2 mana sorcery speed. This is the usual removal spell. It's either a fight spell or a punch spell in green. And this is the first instance, at least for me, right? Because I was looking at this particular effect, mounts. So this Throw from the Saddle, if you're pointing it at a creature that your creature you wanna fight. So this is a fight or a punch? It's a punch. It deals damage, right? So this effect, if you're punching something, you give it +1/+1, and then it punches something. The danger with these punch and fight effects is they can interact, just blow you out, point a removal spell at your creature, point a bounce spell at your creature, commit a crime against you, and it fizzles the Throw from the Saddle. But if your opponent is tapped out, this tends to be a safe thing to do. And then, if it's a mount, they get the permanent +1/+1. I don't really like it. I think the quality of green commons falls off pretty quickly after the first 3 that we talked about. But Throw from the Saddle is a necessary effect in green. I'm not confident this is going to be one of the top 4 commons in green, but it's an effect that you're like, I need it. I need some removal spell in my deck. So Throw from the Saddle is your default removal spell in green. And then to cap off our little walk through the commons in this format, I want to end this with the 6th category, which is basically the lands. So usually in a pack, there's a land slot wherein you can get basic lands. In a draft, people usually ignore this. But in this set, and most Dave Humphries design set, who is a great designer and I love him, 50% of the time, so half of the time, this will be a dual land. And in this particular set, I think those are all deserts, right? So deserts, I want to talk about it because I think deserts, just like Outlaws, are going to be an interesting typing in card typing in this draft format. One, you saw a couple of cards that we talked about wherein deserts, having a desert in play mattered, right? So in common, a lot of those come up. I haven't talked about the uncommons and the rares, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be a few uncommons and rares that are going powerful, and not only commons, that are going to want you check if you have if you have deserts in play. So the second thing that's nice thing about these deserts is, I'll go to the obvious thing. They fix your colors, right? So these let you splash because they give you an extra color. So usually, they can let you splash a third color, or just let you have a very smooth casting adventure through your deck, right? They let you play out your cards better, smoothly, and give you access to all of your colors. And then the third thing that might not be too obvious is when these deserts, these 10 deserts at least, enter at common, they deal 1 damage to target opponent. They commit a crime. These deserts, they commit a crime. So because they point and target at your opponent, you are going to trigger crime effects on your cards. So if you're the type of deck that wants to commit crimes, this deserts, your land drops will commit crimes. So not only can they commit crimes, they can also basically lethal your opponent. If your opponent is down to 1, you can just outside land drop, kill them, right? So where would I draft these? I think I would, if it's in a relevant color, like if I'm drafting white, or if I already know one of my colors, I will probably, if I get a white blue or white green, any of those, the lands get passed to me. If there's none of the top commons or good uncommons there, or maybe sometimes, it depends on the situation, I will get the desert. Only because it does so many things, and makes your deck, your 40 card deck, just so much more consistent, right? You get to commit crimes, you get to cast your spells, you get to ping your opponent, you get to make desert matters effects happen. Amazing. So think about this when you are drafting Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Okay, and I just want to sort of quickly run through the 10 color pairs. I might make this as a separate video, or maybe I'll just include it here. If you're seeing it now, it's part of the same video. So to just give you a sense of how all of those commons that we talked about sort of come together when dealing with the different archetypes that they've implanted in this draft format. First off, there's Gem Lightfoot Sky Explorer, which is a 4-mana, 2 colorless, 2 blue-white, that human scout with 3/3 flying vigilance, does a bunch of things. But at the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, draw a card. So it sort of is, again, a spell-ish archetype, wherein it encourages you to play things at instant speed, leave your mana open. So if you do that at your end step, you get to draw a card. Anything that draws a card is very powerful. Remember that in Limited. Wrangler of the Damned, 3 colorless blue-white, human soldier, which a 1/4. So worth noting, both the blue-white, multicolor signpost uncommons don't have relevant creature typing, but that's fine. It also has flash, so you can flash it in for Gem Lightfoot at the beginning of your end step. If you haven't cast a spell, again, if you hold up your mana open this turn, create a 2/2 white spirit creature token with flying. It gives free stuff, man, and it's so easy to do in blue-white. So think about that. All of those instant speed flash things, holy cow, bounce spells, we can leave our mana open. And also plotting is not casting a spell. It's just basically spending your mana. So you can plot and then still trigger these end step effects for free. Crazy. Good stuff. Okay. The other archetype, white-black Baron Bertram Greywater, 2 colorless, black-white, legendary creature, vampire noble. I noticed the creature typings don't matter for these. Some of them do, Hardy. So 3/4, when 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 black vampire rogue creature token with lifelink. So I think this triggers off if you create a lot of those small mercenary creatures, or if you create treasure tokens, right? We didn't see a lot of those effects. Some of those trigger when something dies, or like the prickly pear, wherein it comes with it in ETB. So not a lot, but that's red. So in white and black, there were some effects that do create tokens. We didn't talk about those because I think specifically those are only really good if you are in the white-black archetype. So watch out for those effects that do that if you're playing white-black. The other white-black uncommon is Ruthless Lawbringer, 1 colorless, black-white, which is a vampire assassin. So relevant creature type. Finally, it's a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature, destroy target non-land permanent. So usually, you will do this if you have mercenaries or small creatures lying around, or creatures that are worth sacrificing in order to just outright be a removal spell for your opponent. Will be good if you've set it up. So this, just watch out. So things to sacrifice and token effects are good in black-white. In blue-black, there's Intimidation Campaign, 1 colorless blue-black enchantment. When Intimidation Campaign enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life, and you draw a card. And then whenever you commit a crime, you may bounce the Intimidation Campaign back into your hand. And then the idea here is you play this out, draw a card, you drain them for 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then you commit a crime, do it again, bounce it into your hand, Intimidation Campaign. Again, this is better if you have a lot of like cheap crime effects, as we've been talking about. That even the deserts trigger this, right? The deserts entering the battlefield bounces Intimidation Campaign. So be wary of committing a crime in this game. This it might be good. Cheap crimes are gonna be good in this game. And then Lazav, Familiar Stranger, is a 1 colorless blue-black legendary creature shapeshifter. Whenever you commit a crime, put a +1/+1 counter on Lazav, Familiar Stranger. Then you may exile a card from your graveyard. If it was a creature, you get to turn Lazav into that creature for a turn. It's any graveyard, by the way. So this is an interesting effect. Again, if your blue-black is all about committing crimes, if you're able to trigger it off deserts, off of your like cheap effects, cheap to cast crimes, but even the more expensive crimes, because Lazav's ability triggers for free without you having to trigger to the mana cost. It's good. I think the nice thing about Lazav is it will always have the +1/+1 counter afterwards. So it's gonna get to be a bigger and bigger creature as you commit more and more crimes. Kind of thematic. So I like this card also. Let's move to black-red. Black-red has Vile Smasher, Gleeful Grenadier. So I guess its name is 2 jobs. It's a Vile Smasher and also a Gleeful Grenadier. I just noticed that. It's a black-red legendary creature, Goblin Mercenary. And it's a 3/2. So whenever another outlaw enters the battlefield under your control, pretty straightforward. Vile Smasher, Gleeful Grenadier deals 1 damage to target opponent. Wait a minute. This also commits a crime. I just realized now. So Vile Smasher, very interesting. It triggers a 1 damage to your opponent every time a relevant creature type, the outlaw, comes in. So it can be a token, it can be a creature that you cast. It's not limited to 1 per turn. So you can, if you have a way to put in multiple outlaws, that's great. It also commits a crime every time you put in an outlaw. So it's an automatic crime when you cast an outlaw. The other black-red effect is at Knife Point. Is a 1 colorless black-red enchantment that is, as long as it's your turn, so only on your turns, outlaws, those creature types, 5 creature types, have first strike. And then whenever you commit a crime, create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token. So this is a bit less powerful effect, but if you have Vile Smasher out, the real MVP is Vile Smasher. Because if you put in a outlaw, Vile Smasher will trigger, and then it will commit a crime, and then it will commit an outlaw for at Knife Point. But thankfully, it's only for you if you're facing against this. This is only capped at 1 per turn, so you won't get. It's not an infinite combo, but that's interesting. So I think at Knife Point is a bit less powerful compared to Vile Smasher, but if you're already into that deck, Knife Point is going to be an interesting card. Okay, and then in blue-red, we have Crom, Violent Cacophony. 2 colorless blue-red, legendary creature, zombie horror, 2/3 flying. And whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Crom, Violent Cacophony, and draw a card. So again, this is an effect wherein it's encouraging you to plot, so you can cast things for 0 mana later on after you plot them, so you can do multiple spells in 1 turn, or you play cheap spells, so just your bounce effects, those 2 mana tricks, those crimes. So this is not necessarily looking for crimes, but as I said at the start of this video or in the other video, this set is really a bit more, I feel like, spell centric, but there are also some creature effects that trigger off of it. The other blue-red effect is Slick Sequence. It's a blue-red instant. Slick Sequence deals 2 damage to any target if you've cast another spell this turn. So basically, it doesn't have to be the second. It can be the third, whatever. You get to draw a card. So again, deals 2 damage to any target. So this is either to face or to another creature. Pretty good. In white-red, I'm less enthused about white-red off the bat. There's Eartha Joe, Frontier Mentor, white 2, colorless white-red, legendary creature, core advisor. Its typing is not relevant. It's a 2/4. When Eartha Joe, Frontier Mentor, enters the battlefield, create a 1/1. So it comes with a body though, so that's always good. And then whenever you activate an ability that targets a creature or player, copy that ability. You may choose 2 targets for that copy. So it's activating an ability, FYI. So it's not copying a spell. But I think they put this in because you can the mercenary by default has a +1/+0 activated ability. So you can spread it out. I guess that's the idea with Eartha Joe. You can give a +1/+0 to multiple things or to the same creature, things like that. The other white-red signpost uncommon is Form a Posse, which is a sorcery X white-red. Create X 1/1 red mercenary creature tokens with what the mercenary does. As I said, I'm less enthused with the white-red effects. Basically, if you pay white-red and X for 1, you create a 1/1. I don't think that's great. This is sorcery speed. This is... I don't know. When does this become good? If you pay for 5, basically white-red and 3X, you get 3 mercenary creature tokens. It's not great. So I have to really think about when this becomes relevant. And I don't know. Not super enthused with this. White-green. I think white-red and white-green are the 2 archetypes, the 2 creature archetypes. So there's Mount and then there's Outlaw. I feel like Mount and the mercenary thing that white-red, go wide, that white-red is doing, probably is a better archetype in uncommon. And that's my guess. That's my guess. Because I was looking at just the uncommons and rares. Some of them support the archetype a bit better. But my suggestion is if you're playing white-red or white-green with only just common cards, probably not a great idea. You're probably better off playing the other two color archetypes. That's my prediction. We'll see if that's true once the set comes out. So white-green is Miriam Herd Whisperer. As long as it's your turn. Legendary creature, human druid, as long as it's your turn. Mounts and vehicles as you control have hexproof. And whenever a mount or vehicle you control attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's a 3/2. So white-green is the mount archetype. So it's trying to encourage you to have mounts. If we look at mounts at common, they're not very good. But I've taken a peek at the mounts in uncommon and also in rare. They tend to be very good. So my guess is, if you're getting to white-green, you're probably gonna get into it for the good. If you find an uncommon mount that's really good, right? They've sort of power gated the white-green and white-red archetype at uncommon and rare. So you're not likely to get there if you're drafting just the commons. Congregation Gryph is 1 mana, green-white. Hippogriff Mount, so this is an uncommon, as I said. Flying Lifelink 1/4, so that's an interesting ability. And whenever Congregation Gryph attacks while saddled, so it's a saddle for 3. And that's my other commentary on saddle. Saddle tends to be very expensive to trigger because, as a rule of thumb, in vehicles, you usually want vehicles that crew for cheap. Like crew for 1, crew for 2 is probably the tops you will be happy with. Crew for 3 is a lot. So, but if you crew it for 3, it gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of mounts you control. So this is basically a 2/5 flying lifelink in the air. It's interesting, especially if you get more and more mounts, and if you have Miriam Herd Whisperer, it's gonna get bigger. But these are both uncommons. So I feel like to make the mount green-white strategy work, you need uncommons and rares. Moving to green-black. Green-black traditionally has been like the graveyard value archetype, not really a theme, and I think that continues to follow. Badlands Revival is a 3 colorless green-black sorcery. Return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So straight revival effect. And then return up to one target permanent. So it doesn't have to be a creature from your graveyard to your hand. So if you can set this up, this is very good. There are not a lot of ways. Usually this archetype or effect is very good if you have a way to cheat putting a big creature into your graveyard, like a discard effect. I haven't seen a lot of that. Maybe in the uncommons and the rares there are. So I think by default this is like a okay effect. But if there's a way to cheat a big creature into your, and I think I saw one. There's like a discard a creature. I'm gonna look for it right now. Yep. Okay. So there's a Spinewood's Armadillo, which is a 6 mana 7/7 with reach ward 3, but you can discard it from your hand. Discard Spinewood's Armadillo, search your library for a basic land or a desert card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle. You gain 3 life. So basically, goes into your graveyard, you get the desert, you gain 3 life, and then at turn 5, you can cast it for 5 for a 7/7 for 5. It's both uncommons. I don't know how often that comes together, but you just want to keep in mind that maybe that's a combo you can pull off. I feel like most of the green archetypes in Outlaws of Thunder Junction are really built starting with a powerful uncommon or a rare. The other black-green signpost uncommon is Honest Rustine, 1 colorless, black-green, legendary creature, human warlock, relevant archetype. It's a 3/2. When Honest Rustine enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Creature spells you cost 1 less to cast. So it's okay. It's these effects tend to be powerful. Take that into account. So usually, I guess if you are black-green, you're just a value engine wherein you're playing good creatures, getting them back later on. These effects tend to be good if, for example, in a multicolor deck, you've drafted a couple of powerful rares. Your opponent points a removal spell at it, and then later on you just Honest Rutstein or Badlands revival it back into play. And that's really just backbreaking usually when it comes to limited. And then the last color pair that second to the last color pair that we will talk about is blue-green. Make your own luck. It's a 3 colorless green-blue sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may exile a non-land card from among them. If you do, it becomes plotted. So blue-green seems to be the plot archetype. Even though plotting seems to be something that is shared across all the colors have access to it. Blue-green is trying to make it more advantageous to plot, right? So make your own luck is not necessarily an advantage to plot. It just lets you put things into plot. So I don't know. It's a way to like find so basically it's 5 mana, put something into plot region, exile, and then later on you can cast it for free, right? I don't know if that's good enough for 5 mana. I don't know. And then Doc Orlock, Grizzle Genius, is a green-blue legendary creature, Bear Druid. Very adorable. 2/3. Might be worth drafting for the adorableness alone. And its ability is spells you cast from your graveyard or from exile. So, from GY, from exile. But I guess in this format, you're already casting things for free with plot, right? So, probably less relevant. Maybe a constructed card is what I'm guessing. And then plotting cards from your hand cost 2 less. So there you go. That's a discount you get. You get to plot even more for cheaper. And then also, it's a cost reduction thing. I don't know if that's good enough. It's also not the relevant creature typing. Again, another disappointing green archetype. But I feel like green is really built as either a multicolor deck or a uncommons and rares deck, I think. And then lastly, the real last archetype we'll talk about is red-green. The first one is Cactus Folk Sure Shot, 2 colorless, red-green, creature, plant, mercenary, relevant creature typing, an outlaw. It's a 4/4 with reach and ward 2, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, other creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain trample and haste until end of turn. It's a big beater, as red-green tends to be. Red-green, again, is not tied to a specific mechanic in the set, but it's 4 power matters. That's not toughness, right? Yeah, 4 power or greater. So again, it rewards you for getting big green creatures. The usual, big creatures, not just green. the usual downside with this archetype is you point a removal spell at that 4-power creature, the whole thing falls apart. So Cactus Sure Shot is Ward 2 that sort of works around that. And then it has Reach. I feel like it's a good creature, period. So if you're already in this red-green archetype, Cactus Folk Sure Shots are probably good, but they're just big beaters. We'll see. And then Jolene, Plundering Pugilist. 1 red-green is a legendary creature, human mercenary. 4/2. Whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures with power 4 or greater, create a treasure token. Some more rampy ramps, and 1 red, sacrifice a treasure. Jolene, Plundering Pugilist, deals 1 damage to any target, commits a crime. Damn it, Jolene. But that's it. I'm not super enthused with that. Again, you have to find a way to put the 4-power creatures into play and then start your whatever engine that you're working. Jolene as a 4/2 feels like pretty easy to point at Desert's Duat. It's a 4/2, so she immediately gets removed. But that's it. I think those are the 10 archetypes in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. My general sense is green tends to be the less powerful at common, but if it can be powerful if you open any of the good rares, any of the good uncommons, and that's how you start building green. Everything else, like blue-white, the blue, red, and black strategies, which are all about pointing spells, plotting, outlaws, I feel like easier to build at common, and probably the more often strategies or archetypes you will encounter on an average run or draft of Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Okay, I hope you guys learned a thing or two. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you liked and are excited to play Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Let me know if you enjoyed what we talked about it. Do you agree? Do you think I'm completely wrong, etc.? And maybe in a couple of weeks, I will make another video in 3 weeks. So the set comes out in 2 weeks. Oh, so in a month, I will make another video talking about was I right, because the data would have come out at that point, and we'll know which of these commons were actually good. Was I wrong? Was I not wrong? Or was I right? Great, I hope I'm right. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time in my YouTube channel of things. Bye.